what's going to happen is, for those of you who have been to one of these workshops before, you already know how this is going to go down. For those of you who are new here, so what today is all about is we're going to be going through the data set itself. And this month, we're going to be going through the July data set for Onyx data. And this is going to be for customer satisfaction and loyalty. So a bit of an interesting topic, right? Hey, Rigoberto. We're going to be looking at the data set itself and seeing how we can improve it, what we can analyze from it, how to basically approach this, right? Then we're going to talk about a couple of visuals that I think are going to be useful for this particular use case. Not necessarily every single setup that it's possible, right? This is just to kind of go into some of the generic ideas of what visuals might be good to take into account when building reports with this current data set. And of course, throughout the session, you always have the possibility to ask questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section. I'm going to try to answer every single one of them, of course, if I have enough time. If not, I'll try to answer them afterwards. Also, if you just don't feel comfortable by posting your questions publicly, right, you just feel shy about it, no issue whatsoever. You can always send a message to webinars@zoomcharts.com to our team, and we'll be able to respond to you all through the email. So there are a plethora of options that you can basically utilize, right? Don't be afraid. Hey, Kishel, first time? Welcome, welcome. But yeah, so you have the webinars email, which you can always reach out to. Not only if you have questions regarding the data set or anything, right? If you just have questions regarding our visuals or just questions in general, you can always reach out. I'm not going to say that we're going to respond in 10 minutes, right? No, we're going to go through them eventually. But yeah, feel free to use that resource. For those of you who are for the first time here, there's a couple of things that I wanted to quickly go through and just reiterate. For those who have been here, you probably seen me do this before, but as for example, Keshaw just mentioned, right? He's the first time joiner, so he hasn't seen any of this, right? So quickly gonna take through a couple of things. So what's important for you who's joining the event? So first of all, don't forget that Onyx Data has its own separate challenge, whereas Zoom Charts is a part of a mini challenge, right? We have our own separate little guidelines that we need to follow in order to be applicable to this challenge. Now, in order to make the experience a little bit better for you as well, or sweeten the deal, basically, right? What we do from our side is we provide you with a developer's license. What is the developer's license? Well, it's a special kind of license that allows you to utilize every single one of Zoom Charts visuals without any cost, without any credit card, anything, any involvement, right? Just basically all you have to do is you have to sign up on our website. In my case, I'm just going to be using my Microsoft email. There we go. Of course, I read the terms, conditions, I register, and well, now I'm a participant. Too bad I can't participate. Well, it is what it is. But right here, you can see I can submit my report once I have created something. And right here, I can see my license. For you, for those of you who haven't taken the license yet, it's going to be get my license. So basically what this does is it gives you a new Microsoft tenant account that we issue from our side. This is going to be your email address that you use within Power BI desktop in order to access the license, right? You need to use this specific account. Whereas for the password, please read through this and understand that this password that you see here is only valid for the first login. Afterwards, you have changed the password because it's one of the prerequisites that you change the password, right? So once you change it, this password is no longer applicable. This is the original password. However, if you do, of course, get stuck on something, can reset your password, anything, reach out to us. All those things can be resolved. Priyanka, also welcome. First time joining. Awesome. Um, yeah, so sign up for the developer's license. That's going to give you the access to all of our visuals. And then, of course, the way and how I recommend you going through things. First of all, just read about the challenge, right? Don't rush into things. There's no need to do that. You have plethora of time available. Read about the challenge, read about how to participate, what's important to take into account, and so forth. Look at the judging criteria as well. Like, for example, this is one of the prerequisites that you need to do in order to participate in the Zoom Charts mini challenge. And then, of course, the brief. Why the brief is so important? Well, quite simply because it gives you ideas on how to tackle the dataset, right? It gives you a couple of key questions that you can guide you through the analysis. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to answer all of them. It doesn't mean you have to answer any of them. This is just basically to give you an idea of what is available, what can you look into. You can go for a completely different approach if you want to. The main idea about these challenges is we provide you with the basis, with the original data set. However you decide to tackle it is up to you, right? The brief is just an idea of what needs to be done if you don't know where to start. So that's one thing. All right, what else? You do, of course, also have an option of booking a session with me. Also, if you have any questions, if you want to go through the report that you have built, or if you just want to tackle a specific point, you can schedule a session. We can have a separate call and go through that, right? These sessions are relatively small in the time, meaning that it's only 15 minutes per session, but it's just so we can, cover as many as possible. Plus, there's customers I need to also kind of cater to. So it's very important to also do that, right? All right. Well, what else? So, if we go, for example, for resources, you also have these emails coming to you and just mentioning a couple of things. But don't forget that there's a blog that you can read about how to utilize, for example, our visuals. You can also look at the challenge page right here. These are the active challenges. If you scroll down, this is the archive of the challenges at any point of time. If it's your first time and you just want to see, for example, what people are doing, what kind of reports they're building, you can open up any one of these. Of course, it's going to take its time, right? I mean, it's summertime. And you can take a look at the previous data set and you can see all the reports that have been submitted, built, and that we have gone through. You can also open up any one of these. If you see anything interesting and you just want to see how it's built, you can download the PBIX file. What else? For webinars, every single webinar is recorded. Also, this webinar is going to be recorded, right? So if you go to the resources and webinars section, here are the upcoming. But again, if you scroll down, here's the archive. For the archive, what I usually recommend to go through is going to be the top 5 webinars. So the top 5 webinars is a second webinar that we usually have in the series, and that's where we go through the top 5 submissions. We talk about them, we explain what things have been executed greatly, what things might have been improved. So that also gives you a good understanding of what we're looking for and how we're basically tackling these reports, right? So there's a vast amount of information that you can look into. There's also ZoomCharts Academy that has video guides. There's documentation. There's a bunch of different materials that's out there. But the main idea is go to the challenge page and just first of all go through it slowly. Don't rush through it. There's no need to it, right? Whenever you create a version of the report that you're feeling okay with, submit it and get the feedback, and then enhance the report based on that. Don't wait until the very last day because there's not enough time to always make all the necessary changes if there are any, right? So just space yourself. Don't try to do or rush things. Just create something, see how it goes, and don't worry about the results, right? Winning is not the main thing. Winning is great, but it's not the main thing. All right. So regarding this particular challenge, so what we have here is going to be a data source, which is going to be, first of all, when you first open it, and this was my reaction as well, right? When I first opened it, I was like, huh, there's only 120 rows, right? And for those who have participated in some of our previous challenges, you know that these sample reports, they're not always very small. Sometimes we have like tens of thousands of rows, sometimes like 1,000 row. So in this case, it seems very small, right? So only 120 rows and only 12 columns. So really not that massive of data set. That's because this time we decided that we want to try out a slightly different approach, right? It's one of the options. The second option is I'm going to tell you as well, right? So we wanted you to kind of tackle this data set a little bit differently. We've always told you that, hey, this is the base, on how you enhance it is up to you. So one of the things that we want to see how you're basically going about and what you think about is how you're going to enhance this data set. Because if you look at it, right, like I said, there's only 12 columns, there's 120 rows, there's really not a lot of dense form of information, right? But every single data set can always be enhanced. You can either decide on what columns you want to add yourself, or, I mean, nowadays, right, we have a plethora of just different AI tools. For example, ChatGPT. I'm just gonna add a file, reference the dataset. What additional columns would you recommend me to add? Give them a little bit of time, but essentially there's different ways, right? You can think about the dataset yourself and be like, huh, I could add this or this part, right? But not necessarily 10 other columns. Some of you might be looking online and be like, okay, I've seen similar data sets and I know they usually look at this sort of KPI or this sort of dimensions. Cool, add it. If not, ChatGPT, go and see based on this. Okay, there's a couple of recommendations: income brackets, total spend of average order, number of purchases, customer tenure. Again, doesn't mean you have to add every single possible thing out there. No, these are again just a couple of ideas, right? There's options on how you can enhance the data set. Usually whenever I have something when it comes to customers and their feedback and, for example, loyalty or anything, there's usually some sort of timeline involved. In this case, you can see there is no date. So date is something that you could theoretically, for example, create. So based on variables, for example, let's go and say, for example, there's different groups. So one group might be more loyal than the other. That's your hypothesis, right? So based on this, you can create a multiplier. Then again, based on the satisfaction score, based on purchase history, whether or not the support was contacted, you can create a timeline and say, hey, if all of these were selected, then put it in this bracket. If it's in this bracket, the customer is our customer since 2024, for example, or 2022, whatever it is, right? You can create these rules and analyze things based on that. It doesn't necessarily always have to be very complex, but you can decide on how complex you want to go with this, right? There's also absolutely nothing wrong with if you decide that there is nothing else you want to add to this. You can use only the original dataset, you can create a report, and it doesn't mean that if you haven't added anything extra, that you don't have any chances of winning. No. Again, remember that these challenges are basically an environment where we're trying to provide you with the tools and materials to play around, to learn new skills, and to experiment, right? This is not your everyday report that you're trying to build for your job, right? Nobody's going to be mad at you if you build something differently, where if something you tried out didn't work, you know, splendidly, let's say it like that, right? So this is an environment where you can just play around with things. You don't have to worry about all the precisions and everything. Just try out new things. Try just loading in the dataset, creating your first reports. If for some of you this is the very first Power BI report as well, don't put a lot of stress on yourself thinking that you have to create the best possible report that's out there. If you do it, awesome. But if you just build your first report and just want to send it to us and, for example, get our feedback on it, you can do it. It doesn't have to involve every possible feature from Power BI: bookmarks, field parameters, DAX, dynamic switches, and everything, right? No, you can create very basic reports and just start with something. It's better than not doing anything. Let's just put it like that, right? Because trust me, when I started off with Power BI, my reports weren't as good as you would think. No, I was learning myself, right? A lot of things were very basic, very down to the core, where some of the visuals were just showcasing labels, no overlaps, no changes over time, no nothing, right? Very basic charts, very basic data sets. Over the time, you learn new things. But that's what the community is all about. It's a way on how you can learn without being sort of constantly worried about the results, right? Whereas in real life, you kind of have to be worried about them. But yeah, so for the data set, we have customer ID, we have 120 unique customers. We have those customers segregated into two different groups. You can see there's group A and group B. Based on this, it doesn't say what type of grouping this is, so you can convert this also in your specific grouping. I don't know, for example, high income, low income, or medium income, whatever it is. You can change these data sets, so that's all good. So grouping, satisfaction score, very understandable. You're going from 1 up to 10. Age, different brackets. We can see that the lowest number is 25, highest number is 60. This is why one of the things in Power BI that I usually recommend is if on the top ribbon right here on the view tab, you also enable column profile and column quality. Quality are these three little things right here, which give you a very quick insight whether or not the values are valid, giving you an error or empty. And the column profile is this part right here, which shows when you select a column. So it quickly profiles it and gives you an understanding of what's within it, right? So for example, this is what I usually do. I have them always enabled, and I just click on the columns and be like, okay, I go from that to that. The average is about that and that. Okay, scores. Okay, ages, genders. I see how many values there are. What's the distribution for them? It doesn't mean that I'm going to be always trying to make all of these reports straight away, right? Or the charts or anything, but it gives me an idea of what the data set consists of, right? Am I going to go back to this and look at this 10 more times because I'm going to forget? Absolutely. But at least whilst I'm learning about the dataset, this might give me ideas. What I usually do is this is a part where I have basically a pen and pencil and a piece of paper next to me, and I start to make some sort of scribbles of, okay, I could do this on a chart, right? And this could be a line, there could be a title, okay, I have this sort of column, just brainstorming, right? Location, we have a couple of locations, we see there's different states, okay, cool. Purchase history, yes, no, okay, so these are basically true false values, right? Whether or not the customer has made previous purchases or not, cool. Support contacted, okay, whether they have reached out to us or not, okay. Loyalty level, three different levels. Okay, taking that into account. Satisfaction factor. For this one, this is the one where I kind of stayed for a second, right? And the reason why I stayed here for a second, I was like, what is a satisfaction factor? The way and how this is interpreted is this is the main factor why a positive review was given to you, right? This is the reason why they purchase or basically use your services. And then, of course, latitude and longitude. Nothing much I can do about this or tell you about this. We can see there's different locations, probably based on the location that we had there for the states and cities, right? So just the latitude and longitude. So we could use a map potentially if we want to, right? We don't necessarily have to do it, but we can. Okay, now that you've gone through it, ChatGPT, we remember it gave us a couple ideas, and also you can see it tells us some modeling considerations. You can probably also ask what type of analysis could I do on this, right? Play around with every single tool that's possibly out there that you want to use. Because at the end of the day, I can tell you from my experience, nobody cares how you got to the answer as long as you got to the answer, right? This is also something I teach in universities. Nobody cares if you're going to be Googling how to calculate this and that, how to write that and that sort of DAX or anything. I don't care. As long as you do the job, as long as you're interested in learning, you'll get to that result, right? So just play around with what's available to you. All right, we went through Power Query, a couple of things. Then, of course, we just send it through and we go to the report as well. Again, I haven't created anything super complex here, a very basic approach. My idea was, okay, we know that there's going to be customer, right? Customer seems to be the main thing about this report in a way. So one of the things that I of course wanted to understand is how many customers do I have? So I could of course do something like this, right? I'm going to go to a separate page. I could create a card. I could use customer ID as a value and then just say distinct count. So it's going to give me 120, right? That's the correct answer. However, using this approach and switching to distinct count isn't the best approach when it comes to data modeling. The reason for this is that different visuals might treat this differently and there might be some error cases. So it's always better to convert these sort of values that you know you're going to be using into a measure. In this case, customer count is a very simple measure. It's just a distinct count, right? All you have to basically do is start writing distinct. Distinct means unique, distinct count based on customer ID. Not underscore, man. There we go. Closing bracket. So it's the same measure, and if I replace it with this one, you can see it works as well. And if I, for example, decide to filter it, you can see these numbers get filtered as well. So it's always better to create those simple measures like total amounts, sums, averages, and these sort of things, right? You can use the aggregations of numerical columns, like for example, here it could be count, but if I would go for something like a satisfaction score, I could also choose one of these, right? You can do it, but like I said, it's not the most recommended thing because there might be some edge cases where things just don't work as you would expect because it's not a measure. So create your basic measures. Once you create your basic measures, in my case, I created basically two for now. If I would need anything else, I would create something else. So I created my customer account. I know that there is satisfaction, right? If we go to the challenge itself, well, it's right here as well. For example, Onyx data. If we go to the brief, go customer satisfaction, right? So the keyword somehow stuck in my head. So some sort of satisfaction probably needs to be measured, right? Again, average satisfaction score. I could use satisfaction score, switch it to average, but I just created a measure which is just an average. If I'm gonna need to create something more specific, I could go, for example, for something like an average X, or instead of even an average, I could go for or median. So different things can be calculated, right? In my case, like I said, I'm going for a very basic approach. Customer account, average satisfaction score. Then afterwards, I want to be able to define what is the range of the scores that I'm looking into. The reason why I want to do this is because going through the brief, one of the questions is does, for example, right here, does contacting customer support negatively impact satisfaction? And there's going to be a couple of places where it says, whether it somehow changes between, for example, one property or the other. Like we had repeated purchases, whether they contacted support and so forth. So some sort of a number needs to be displayed. But I also want to understand if there's any difference between different brackets. Here I'm just using 1 to 10, but you could also theoretically just say, for example, create bins, like groups of values, like 0 to 2, 2 to 4, or 0 to 5, 5 to 10. You decide on how you want to approach this, right? You have the data set, you have all the capabilities. So here, for example, I could say, that, okay, if I'm focusing from 5 and above, what's the average score rating? Okay, cool. What type of customers do I have the most? Okay, female customers. Great. What is the age proportion? Okay, that is one. What's going to be in this case, the loyalty levels based on some sort of loyalty definition that I have in the data set. So I can see that the highest amount of customers with the highest value of the score is actually in the loyalty level. If I open that up, that's going to give me these dots because they're so small I don't see the names, but if I get a little bit closer, it shows me, for example, product quality, brand reputation. So what are the main things that they value, right? So all of these things are taken into consideration whenever you're building these. The one thing that I highly encourage you to do, and this is not only what I encourage you to do, this is something that every single reviewer that's going through these reports is going to tell you: play around with the data. If you create two, three, four visuals, don't be afraid and do not forget to actually try to play around with them. What I mean by this: okay, so what happens if I say that this is going to be from 5 to 10? I focus on the female audience. I focus on group B. I also focus on this map visual. So you're trying to see if anything breaks, right? Because one of the things that I can assure you of is none of us have created a report that hasn't been broken. Every single one of us has created a report and somebody manages to break it. It's inevitable. As much as I would love to say that no, those things don't happen, it does happen. But one way on how you can sort of mitigate that risk is play around with them, right? See what happens if you change the order of selections. Does anything change if you, for example, create instances like this one? And this is done on also on purpose, right? you can see that loyalty level is used here and here. So what happens is there are two kind of scenarios which I don't necessarily like, and I would probably change in the report. If I selected the group B, now you can see the loyalty levels. If I select low, what it basically leaves me with is just a single dot in the scatter plot. Yeah, not very interesting, right? And vice versa. If I select the low group and I do a drill down to the satisfaction factors, if I click on low, you can see suddenly the donut chart is just one massive circle. Right? This is one of the things you try to avoid. You want the report to be interesting. You want it to be able to actually explore and tell you something. You don't want to create a lot of these situations where basically a single click eliminates 95% of the report. Right? So play around with your charts, see how they cross filter the information. If you have any, let's say, conflicts of filters, if you're unnecessarily removing something, one common mistake that a lot of people do is if you have, for example, something like a table. Let's go for a group, for example. So a table by default issues a selection. So for example, if I select group A, I can then select something afterwards here, also in drill down A, but you can see this value is still here. So what this means is instead of completely filtering out the data based on your selection, you're only basically selecting that part of it. And if you have any conflicting filters, that could remove that. So for example, if I create another slicer next to it with a group, and this is a very common mistake. You have a table which references the same thing that you have in a slicer. You can see I can click B, I can click on A, the data gets filtered visually, but the slicer has both values. So what might happen is the user accidentally selects something on a table, and then afterwards on a slicer, he selects group B. This is a conflicting filter because you just said me that I need to focus on A, but then you filter out only the B results. This is why you play around with them. And if you think like, okay, but nobody would do this, no, trust me, it's a lot more common than you would think. Like for example, I could just create a very basic table of having, let's say, the group. I'm just gonna move the chart right here. So I have a group, I have the satisfaction score, then I have the customer count, just to make the table a little bit smaller. Customer count, okay, something like this, right? So whenever they see a table, naturally, sometimes people click on it, and this means if I click here, for example, it means that I selected the A row. So now if I again highlight this, break the report. Vice versa, I select the A, click on B, sorry, click on A. So always be cautious about these things, right? Just play around. You don't have to rush, like I said. You have a large amount of time, I would say, right? So today is the 3rd of July. The deadline for the submission, let me double check when it was, 25th of July. You have 22 days. That's enough time to do this slowly without any rush. And don't forget that what we allow you to do is also you don't have to only submit it once. You can submit the first version of your report. Like I said, get the feedback and see, for example, from our team saying, hey, we would recommend you to do this, this, and that. Do those things if you know how to. If not, reach out to us. We'll try to explain it as well. And then resubmit a next version. This is why you don't leave things to the very last moment. So yeah, something like this, for example. So you have your satisfaction scores, your customer counts, your average score. Then what I did, and yeah, thank you, Alexandra. Specifying the time is also very important. So yeah, customer account satisfaction scores. Then, for example, you have things that are essentially like flags, right? Let's say purchase history, whether there was or there wasn't. So I allow the user to basically move between two sets of users. Same, was the support contacted or not? And this is where you kind of start to look into those values, right? Once I do this, having just a single card which shows me the average satisfaction score is great. It allows me to focus on one thing, but at the same time, it doesn't really allow me to compare these values. Because, I mean, let's be honest, right? Nobody in their right mind would do this. If you have one score and be in a meeting, for example, with your managers and be like, so if you want to compare them, you're going to be doing this 492, 457. You can see there's not a big of a difference, right? You don't want to do that. You want them to be able to see those differences. So you might think that maybe there's a different way on how you can, for example, divide this card. So maybe have a one card for those who had contacted support and for those who haven't. Maybe it's a matrix that you're creating basically to showcase different variables based on charts that you can cross filter, right? There are different ways on how you can play around with this. You can also go for it sort of a one versus the other approach. So for example, if we just take, let's say, this one as the main slicer, right? If I create, sorry, went to the wrong one. If I take this slicer and if I go to this page, right? So I keep it here just for a reference, but I'm going to be doing this. So customer count, satisfaction score average. Then I'm going to go with, for example, again, probably would be one of the new cards maybe, or I could go for gender and customer count, maybe showcase the split. Like I said, the formatting doesn't matter too much right now, right? This is just the idea. But I wouldn't want to have this slicer only affecting, for example, one part, right? I wanted to kind of have the possibility to look between the both of them. So the slicer itself, I would remove. I would create a copy of this, have it right next to it. For these visuals, go into the filter pane and just go ahead and say, if we were talking about purchase history, yeah. You can set it on page, you can't set it on all pages because otherwise it's going to affect everything. So what you can do is just say that, hey, this is going to be the column where purchase history is on no, so all the results get factored for this particular view. Actually, since this doesn't have it, I'm just going to copy this one, vice versa, because this one already has the field. So now I'm just going to switch. Whereas this one focuses on those who are repeated customers, right? And just say, for example, these are repeated customers, non-repeated customers. And then a third portion would be basically the difference between them. Or you can leave it in the middle, the comparison values, just add some titles and everything. So this sort of approach. But then, of course, allow the user to somehow also have some sort of visuals. Because these sort of blocks of versus one versus the other are good, but at the same time, I look at them more as an infographic, not as an interactive report, right? So you want to enhance this somehow with something additional. This could be one page, for example, where you allow the user to focus on certain groups versus the other. You can do this not just by filters. For those of you who are more advanced, you can also just use in a calculation, use calculate and then use filter, right? So for example, if I remove this, I have 120 um, non-repeated customers. I could use calculate to reference the customer count, and the filter is purchase history equals, I think it was both in caps, but I have to double check. No, it was not. You have to be careful with these. It's case sensitive. calculated purchase history? No. I do. Yes. No. Data purchase history? No. Okay, let's expand on it. Not age, sorry. I'm probably missing a rookie mistake. It's 30 degrees, guys. I might miss something. I'll double check this. But yeah, you can use this also with calculate, right? So there are different ways on how you can essentially approach these. So that's one thing. What else? And I know 30 degrees for some of you might not seem a lot, but when you spend the last 2 weeks in like 15 degrees, suddenly 30 degrees, it's not cool. So having these data sets. What else? Age. For example, we have an age column. And like I said, here we go from 25 up to 60. We could, of course, have a chart that shows us all of them. But what I would probably recommend is working with some sort of binning or grouping. Binning is very simply done on Microsoft Power BI. All you have to do, right click on a column, new group. There we go. Groups. I don't know why they made it so narrow because you can't even see part of it, but hey. Group type is bins. You can also do this by a list. List means you're manually defining what is where exactly, whereas binning is you're just basically working with buckets. So you choose a bin, then you decide whether you want to define the size of the bin or the number of bins. So in one case, I want to have bins with every 5 values. In the other one, I want to have 5 bins and I don't care how many values are within them. I just want 5 even groups. So in my case, I'm going to say the size of the bin and how big is the size of the bin. So every group is going to be 5 values. Press OK. That creates a new column right here. It's the same approach I've done here. And then just use it in a visual. And you can see 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, and so forth. This is a lot more manageable than if I would give you a chart like this. Also, let's sort it based on age, right? Ascending based on age. Remove the groups because groups are secondary values. So yeah, this squeezed a lot, right? So I just want to have something that's a little bit easier to manage. There you go. Change the sorting. Always, whenever it comes to things that actually make sense to have been sorted in a proper way, adjust the sorting. You could, of course, go ascending or descending, doesn't matter. But what I wouldn't say is would be easy to understand for the customers is, for example, when you go like this. Sure, it allows you to quickly see who's the highest contributor, but then the x-axis has no continuality, right? These are completely separate groups and you're just focusing on the highest contributor. Whereas for storytelling, usually whenever you have something like ages, time, or any sort of some sort of chronological order could be applied to it, it makes sense to apply that sort of formatting so it's a lot easier to tell the story. You can also, of course, conditionally format and say, hey, if this column has the highest point, I wanted to highlight it in a particular color. You can go ahead and do that. You can play around with thresholds, for example, and say, hey, I want to have a line which is the maximum based on series 1, so that's the max. Then I want to have another line which is also a line but is the minimum line for series 1. So everything else that is in between is sort of the okay state, right? It's above the minimum, it's below the maximum. So there are different ways on how you can do with this. You can also go ahead and play around with medians and so forth, right? If you don't want to go with the average, sort of the min max approach, median also one of the options. From median to max. If just lines are not enough, okay, instead of two thresholds, have one, convert it into an area. and just say that the from value is going to be actually the not from is going to be the median, to value is going to be the maximum of series 1. So you highlight that portion. You can have it in the front of the chart, you can send it to the back, you can change the background opacities and so forth, you can give it a name. There's a different things that you can do with this, right? Play around with things. Don't be afraid to try out new things. If you don't like it, remake it. The one thing that I definitely can recommend you to do, especially for those of you who know that you like to play around with 10 different variations, I'm guilty of that as well. So, what I usually do, instead of just recreating the chart, so for example, let's say, you know what, I don't like these colors or maybe some formatting options. So, instead of just remaking the original chart, I do this. I'm going to have this chart. I know that I'm going to have this chart potentially. I create another page, call it scatter options or whatever it is, and actually copy the scatter plot, not the card. Happens to the best of us. Scatter options, copy it, and just have it right here. That's the original. This is the one that I'm going to be remaking. I don't know. I want to have maybe a regression line that separates the not 10 degrees. That's a bit extreme, but only 2 levels of separation. What else I could do? I could play around with the value axis. I don't want to configure them together. For the y-axis, yeah, separately for the y-axis, I'm actually going to be inverting the values. So I want to focus on basically going lower in the customer count. Let's say I want to highlight the one that's in the low part. Okay, cool. I want to enable crosser. Maybe the color turn to black. Okay, yeah, that's okay. Keep it there. Outside labels, do I need to change anything? Probably not. Category colors, if I want to have any, or just go to data options and say all points are just same color. And just play around with these variations, right? Create one, create second, create third, have them here. And whenever you want to see which one works better, well, you just go back to the original page, delete this, paste it in. Come on, man. You can do it. You can copy the right visual, right? I should be able to do it, right, guys? There we go. Now I take this one, put it in here. Nah, I like the previous one better. Delete this one, go back, take the other, right? Because now I have both of these. So I can always reference back to it. What I tend to do with these pages is basically keep them whenever I'm developing the report. Um, Once you are fully done with the report, you assume that you're fully done. Because throughout the editing process, I don't delete them. I just hide them because nobody should look at them. They're something I'm just using for working, right? They're just a reference point. Look at the pages that are visible. For these ones, keep them there. And whenever I'm finished with a project or something that I deliver to the customer at the end, what I do is I always save version with all these pages, and I save it basically as source. And then I create one copy of it, which is the fine-tuned one, right? Doesn't have any unnecessary pages, everything is fine-tuned, everything is there. So you can easily do that and just reference it. The good thing about having that original source is that whenever, for example, customer comes back and says, hey, is there anything we could do about this chart? You might already have a couple of options lined up because you previously tried out different options. If not, then hey, we can create always something new, right? But having those original sketches, designs, ideas might sometimes be very beneficial. If not for this project, it might work for another project or another report. Doesn't matter. Don't just delete things because I'm not gonna be using it, so might as well just delete it straight away. So yeah, think about those things. Um, about the dataset, like I said, you are fully okay to use only the original dataset. But what I would encourage you to do is to play around with the data a bit. See if you can add another dimension. See if you can transpose things to help you to tell a better story, to highlight certain trends or anything, right? The brief, the information in the brief regarding the challenges doesn't mean they must be answered. These are just a couple of ideas of what can be analyzed or shown with the available data. Maybe in some cases you need to add a little bit of additional information, but this at least gives you some ideas on how to tackle this. Worst case scenario, cannot figure out yourself, none of the brief questions talk to you, go to ChatGPT, ask another question. Hey, what would you do with this data set? Cannot figure that out. I mean, reach out to us. That's another option. We'll probably send you the brief first of all and be like, hey, have you taken a look at the brief? Right? And if not, then we'll try to give you also some other ideas on what could be answered with the available data set. All right. Looking at the time as well, I just want to be cautious about it. Do we have any questions? Since no data is given by default, we cannot analyze trends over time. Yeah. So time dimension is something that you would have to add on your own. How you do it is completely up to you. Like I said, you could theoretically do this based on additional properties, right? Let's say whether the customer belongs to group A or group B. What's the satisfaction score? Is he a repeated customer or has he contacted support? What loyalty group? So all those could be just multipliers, and for example, moving the timeline back and forth. Adding assumed dates won't create misleading trends. Absolutely, but this is a mock data set. None of this is real. Remember, these sort of challenges and the way and how you approach them, if it hasn't been specified in the rules that you only have to create something with the given data set, right? No extensions, no additional dimensions, no nothing. Then you have to work with what's available. Creating misleading trends then would be a problem. In this case, since we allow you to play around with these data sets to add those additional dimensions, you can basically create your own narrative. What I mean by this. All right, looking at the data, I know that I want to have some sort of a timeline and I want to showcase some sort of trends. Cool. Looking at these very quickly, I would just play around with the data, right? Just filter out A. Here I wouldn't even see it. Yeah, so what I would do instead of table view, I would go to Power Query, use my column profiling. So now filter out group A, call satisfaction scores from 1 to 10. Okay, is it any different from group B? 1 to 10. Okay, so both of them are 1 to 10. 5.12. If I switch this to A, 5.12. Okay, not a lot of difference. Okay, so these don't matter too much. Okay, going back on next, age might be a multiplier of some sorts. Gender might be a multiplier, but I would probably focus on these three: purchase history, whether or not the support was contacted, and the loyalty level. So for loyalty level, if it's high, it probably means that these customers have had repeated purchases. These customers probably have been with us for a long time. So you adjust the starting date of when the first purchase was made by X amount of periods. If it's somebody who just recently purchased, is in a low loyalty level, hasn't contacted support, but has made purchase histories, maybe he's a customer for like half a year. So play around with those and see what sort of trends you create with these. This is all in your hands and you define how things are going to be told. But if you don't want to analyze any of those sort of trends over time, simple. Don't add time dimension. Sometimes the best solution is the simplest one, right? But like I said, it's completely up to you guys. You can play around with your own ideas. You can figure out what else you can do. ChatGPT can help you. Um, you can also you can talk to each other. See what, for example, I wish I've done it more when I was learning Power BI. Is instead of trying to do everything on my own, use let's say, the energy of other people in a sense, in a way that, let's say, if you find somebody like-minded as yourself who seems interesting to you, reach out to them. And if you both participate in these sort of challenges, try to compete with each other, not just with everybody, but with each other, to make it more interesting. Define the rules within your own scope, right? So, for example, let's say both of us are going to be adding a time dimension, both of us are going to be adding this dimension, and let's see what we can do with this, right? Because sometimes just being a part of community, being part of a community is great, but sometimes not having the ability to communicate with somebody directly kind of puts you a little bit down in a mood. And forever who is learning Power BI, I can give you one line graph, which helped me. Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm gonna find my favorite interpretation of this. Yes, these ones I like. Make it a little bit bigger, not smaller. Sorry. Yeah. So what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, it's basically a line that shows you how you're learning any new skill in your life. Right? There are points where we feel very confident, but we know very little, and there are points where we know even more than we used to before, but we don't feel very confident about it. And this is basically how we go through learning all new skills. So the way that this was for me, right? I started off learning Power BI. I got to here in about three to 4 months. I was feeling great. I know so much about Power BI. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. Everything's awesome, right? And then you start to realize I basically know nothing, because DAX is so complicated. Data modeling is not easy. Data visualization has so many things you need to take into account. Blah 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 blah, and you kind of get here, and you're in a valley of despair where you're basically lacking motivation. So what happens at this point for people is usually you need to try to find your focus. What is the one thing you want to focus on? In my case, that was data visualization in general. I wanted to understand the psychology of colors. I wanted to understand what visuals are used for what instances, what are the chart types meant to be used for, rather than just looking online what people are doing, but what is the intent of that chart, right? I wanted to understand that. So I started to focus on that. With that, I also learned Power BI more, because once I understood what the particular chart types are meant for, I wanted to try it out. I was creating data sets, I was starting to play around with visuals, with the formatting options, and just slowly learning and basically taking my way. I'd say I'm probably still on the slope of enlightenment. I'm not here. But what happens at this point of time is here, you're very defensive for critique. Here, you just don't care about it. Here, instead of taking it as a critique, right, you're taking it as an opinion. Everybody can have opinions. That's fine. It's what you do with it that matters. All right. What else? Yeah, probably the last thing that probably from my side, which I would recommend to do, and I would ask you to do. I'm gonna be selfish this time. The feedback forms. You see in the comments as well. Alexander, can you pop up the QR code as well so that everybody sees it on screen as well? So the feedback forms, guys. The feedback forms are mainly there for us to understand whether or not you like what we're doing, right? Tell us what you think. If you think that some of the materials that we're providing are not enough or not informative enough, tell us about it. If you think the sessions are redundant, you don't like them, it's very boring, tell us about it. If you think they're awesome, also tell us about it. It's always nice to hear some good things as well. But any comment allows us to understand what should we be focusing on. Should we change the format of the session? Are there different things that we should be focusing on, and so forth? So do let us know. And there's an unwritten rule that I decided on myself. If you submit the feedback form, there's unwritten chance of 10% increase that you're going to win the challenge. Sure. Probably not, but sure. But yeah, guys, I hope it was interesting and informative for you, that you managed to learn something actually useful from today. That's the most important thing. And if you did, that's awesome. If not, my apologies. I'll try to make it up for you next time. But what I would recommend you to do is to participate in the challenge, send us your reports, and I'll see you in the next webinar, which is going to be the top 5 announcement and the winner announcement, of course. So, yeah, thank you so much for the time and have an amazing rest of the day then. Bye, everyone.